Good evening. It is time for today's Tax Talk. I'm your host. I'm attorney Stephen Leahy. It is Wednesday, April 17th, the year of our Lord 2022. And it's time we start fact-checking the fact checkers about this Inflation Reduction Act. Remember, I laugh every time I hear it because it's such a joke, because it ain't a reduction in inflation. But anyway, that's what we're going to talk about today. Won't you join us? Thank you so much for joining us. I appreciate you. I'm kind of shaking my head here, in that this Inflation Reduction Act, we keep, all the propaganda is telling us what a great thing this is, what a great, wonderful move it is, historic even. And don't worry, it's got nothing to do with going after, it's good that we're doubling the size of the IRS. It's a good thing. It's going to make everything more equal. That's the story that we hear it about everything. Every time they try to change something, when they raise your taxes, right? Don't worry, the rich are going to pay more, but you wind up paying more, don't you? Don't worry, when they start handing out programs, don't worry, you're going to get you don't get anything. No program for you. You're the one paying for the programs. Don't you understand that? And even if they do give you programs, it costs more than if you bought it yourself. In this program, in this Inflation Reduction Act, they're going to do $150 million. It's just an investigation to see about providing free tax returns for people. Not everyone, but some people. And again, as I mentioned, we did a whole show on this, in that there's nothing more expensive than when the government gives something away for free. And that's always going to be the case, and it's the case now. So let's start fact-checking the fact-checkers, and it comes to this IRA, they call it now. The IRA, because we can't keep saying Inflation Reduction Act. Every time I say it, it makes me laugh. Anyway, so let's let us take a look. Let me see if I can get rid of that. Yep. Let's take a look. Here we go. So here's the first story. Fact check team. How the IRS expansion could impact middle-class Americans. Kevin McCarthy, the minority leader, House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy, tweeted that there will be 710,000 new audits for Americans who earn less than $75,000. So now let's just remember, generally these audits don't take any manpower. They're done electronically. So, but he's just basing. Democrats' new army of 87,000 IRS agents will be coming for you with 710,000 new audits for Americans who earn less than $775,000 a year. The National Desk's fact check team has been looking through the Inflation Reduction Act to see if his statement adds up. There are some holes in McCarthy's assessments. Republicans used the 2021 Congressional Budget Office analysis that said new funding for the Internal Revenue Service would raise audit rates for taxpayers to levels of around about 10 years ago. Based on that analysis, GOP leaders took 2010 audit rates and 2018 tax returns and concluded there would be thousands of new audits for the middle class. The main issue with the claims is that the CBO's analysis is not of the updated bill, and none of those figures are in the bill. No, they don't tell you how many more are going to be audited. That's true, but he's using their own numbers, what they say. According to the latest numbers from the IRS, consider the source. Americans making between 25 and 500,000 had a 0.2% audit rate. The highest was for those making more than 10 million at a rate of 8.7%. a Government Accountability Office report that shows from 2010 to 2019, audit rates decreased for all income levels. IRS officials said audit rates declined due to staffing decreases and because it takes more staff time and expertise to handle complex higher income results. Now, this is a key point, and I think people kind of gloss over it. And I'm going to read it again. IRS officials said audit rates declined due to staffing decreases and because it takes more staff time and expertise to handle complex higher income audits. So, how are we going to get expertise to handle complex higher income audits? Keep that in mind. The Biden administration says there shouldn't be any negative impact on the middle class. No, don't worry about it. I have a story in here from Janet Yellen who said, no, don't worry. We're not coming after you. We're not going to change the rates for anybody under 400,000. And we'll talk about why that can't be true. It can't be true. It's impossible to be true. And this is why. Well, here's the mention. Just days ago, and I have the story in here too. Just days ago, Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen sent a letter to the IRS directing them to not use any new resources to increase audit rates on Americans making under $400,000. But experts say there could be some indirect impacts on the middle class. Well, there could be some. For example, the Inflation Reduction Act requires a minimum 15% tax for large corporations. As a result, experts think businesses could lower wages and use the money to pay the taxes. Are they going to take it out of their profits? The answer is, of course not. That's not the way business works. They add that to you. Whatever their product is, they're going to recoup it. That's the way it works. There are many critics of the 87,000 agents being added to the IRS. That's because last year, before the bill was publicly available, the Treasury Department itself proposed a plan to hire roughly that many IRS employees if it got the money. According to the Treasury official, we will know how many employees they will plan to hire in the next few months, but the new agents will not be hired at the same time. The new hires will happen over the next 10 years, and they won't all be auditors. Many will be replacing employees that are expected to quit or retire. According to the numbers, the IRS could use some extra hands. It currently has roughly 78,000 employees, but the agency's budget has shrunk by more than 15% over the last decade, and according to the IRS, because of that, staffing levels and audit rates have declined. Okay, we've talked about this a lot. Since 2010, was it 2010 or 2012? In the last decade, how many more? They were still geared to process returns, right? They were still processing. They were still processing paper returns. Paper returns are a very labor-intensive feat. It takes a long time. We can go through it again. Maybe this week I should play the pipeline video again so you can see how labor intensive it is. And when you reduce that, and again, computers do not only reduce because now they're all filed electronically. The last figure I saw, 95% of all returns in 2021 were filed electronically. Well, you don't need as many people, isn't that right? If 25% of your employees used to process tax returns, and now you're not processing tax returns, you don't need those 25%, do you? And not only that, the facilities to house those documents and move them around and open them up, that's not processing returns. That how much more of the employees were that? I don't know the number. We could find out. The IRS has all their numbers online, and we can look it up. That's where I got the figure from 1995 that the IRS had 114,000 employees, and about 25% of them were return processors. That's where that number comes from, the IRS's own numbers. So if they don't have that, if they don't need to do that anymore, well, doesn't it make sense that they should have less employees? And if they have less employees, didn't it make sense that that it shouldn't affect other areas like audits, because processing had nothing to do with audits. So why would stop cutting down on the processing? Why would that stop auditors? I don't know the answer to that. It doesn't make any sense to me. But anyway, I digress. So let's go back to the story. As a result of those staffing shortages, as we said, the IRS agents only answered 10% of the phone calls during this year's filing season, and they currently are dealing with a backlog of 11 million processed tax returns. Again, why would cutting data processing affect answering the phone? It's a different line item. It's a different department. The answer is it shouldn't. And the backlog of unfiled, unprocessed returns are because there were paper returns. Because of COVID, there was a lot of errors, and they were created paper returns or amended returns. And we can go through this in another time and I've talked about it on the show many times about why there was a lot more paper returns, and the IRS wasn't geared for it because they had cut their staff because they didn't need them. And you won't need them next year or the year after that. But right now, we're still fighting with that backlog. And that's one of the problems. Okay, that's one of the things. So let's. If the inflation bill gives $80 billion to the IRS, which includes $25 billion for operations, $5 billion for technology modernization, and $45 billion for tax enforcement, the rest of the money will be spent on upgrading technology and operations of the agency. So this is a little bit disingenuous, isn't it? That this is why the IRS budget this year after supplemental and all that is $14 billion. Because it was $12.7 billion. The Congress had already given them another billion this year. And now they gave them another $80 billion. So now it's $81 billion. Don't worry about a beefier IRS, says this gentleman, unless you're a tax cheat. Well, that's assuming all business owners are cheaters. I've helped people with many audits. It's not cheaters that are audited. Often, some are, and that's true. But some are not. They're not cheaters. The taxman, and you don't have to be a cheater not to keep good records. And if you don't keep good records, the IRS is going to assess additional taxes against you. That's the way it works. The taxman has not become a thing very much, and Democrats aim to fix that with the key plank of a newly passed Inflation Reduction Act. Republicans warn that this is really an assault on the working class Americans, whom Democrats plan to tax into oblivion. Regular working people who pay their taxes shouldn't fear a beefier IRS. What is a regular working person? Someone with a W-2? Democrats are trying to close the tax gap. I've often told you that the tax gap is the boogeyman. They use it for everything. And this is pretty interesting here because I've said this before on this show many times. They could be hiding income. There could be honest disagreements about what actually counts as income. There could be simple mistakes. Whatever the reason, the tax gap is huge. Estimates range from an annual tax gap of about $280 billion to as much as $1 trillion. Well, that's a big difference, isn't it? Fully closing the tax gap would raise way more revenue than all the tax hikes President Biden has tried and failed to pass. He did pass some, didn't he? So that's just not true. He did pass some tax increases. For working people earning most of all their income from labor, as most people do, it's very hard to cheat on your taxes because the IRS takes it from you, and they keep an eye on you. That's why. And so they say, well, that's what we're doing to you. We should do it to everybody. And then it's not fair that we are onerous on you, and we're looking at every dime that you come in. It's not fair that we don't do that to everybody. So we should do it to everybody. Does that make sense to you? But there's little room for creative accounting if your income is from only one source and you're an employee rather than a business owner. The IRS estimates that only 1% of workers who fill out a W-2 form misreport their income. It's reported. How can you misreport it? If you make a mistake, the IRS will bring it to your attention immediately. Wealthy filers have more opportunities to cheat, and they do. The wealthy earn far more than their income from investments, rental income, business profits, and other sources where reporting to the government is indirect or non-existent. Tax lawyers and accountants have made many ways to hide income for the wealthy. They don't find ways to hide income. They find these laws that are available to avoid paying taxes on it. Have you seen I should probably bring in the tax code. It's 2 books this thick, the tax code. And so they're not hiding income. They're merely using the tax code to their advantage. The Congress wrote those laws. It's what you're supposed to do. I don't know. Income underreporting rate is based on how opaque or hard to track the source of the income is. The IRS estimates that 55% of the most opaque income goes unreported, costing the Treasury hundreds of billions of dollars in foregone revenue each year. The IRS has struggled to catch these tax cheats because Republicans who control the presidency from 2017 to 2021, 4 years, and the president doesn't have the budget, doesn't have much to do with the budget. And Congress for several years before that have consistently whacked away at the agency's budget. Okay, so Democrats have been in control of Congress for most of my life. What happened to the budget? It's $14 billion a year. That's not enough. The IRS budget has shrunk by about 20% during the last decade. We just talked about that. Leaving it short of auditors, support staff, and modern computers. As I mentioned, why is that? Doesn't make any sense. It's not because they reduced processors. A recent Washington Post expose detailed the outdated manual processes the IRS must use because its software and hardware is decades old. Some systems were made by companies no longer in business. Audit rates have plunged by 64% for the wealthiest Americans since 2010, and by 50% for the biggest corporations. And then they bring up Al Capone because they're telling you, well, Al Capone, that's who we're after. How many Al Capones are there? Well, none now. He's passed long ago. The Inflation Reduction Act, which Biden signed into law, provides $80 billion in additional funding for the IRS during the next decade. The agency says it will use that money to hire thousands of new employees, update its technology, and improve customer response times. Republicans are hysterical. Do you make $75,000 or less? Democrats' new armies of 87,000 IRS agents will be coming for you. Leader Kevin McCarthy said, we just saw that tweet. A group of House Republicans claims ordinary law-abiding workers will have to contend with 710,000 new IRS audits. The Wall Street Journal editorial page laments the new IRS audit wave about to hit to the middle class. All of these claims are making the rounds on conservative media. All Democrats really stupid enough to use are the Democrats really stupid enough to use their slim majority in Congress to harass middle-class voters with needless tax audits that will produce hardly any revenue? If they are, they deserve to be thrown out from office and probably will be. Well, I'm running out of time here because I don't like to go beyond the 20-some minutes, but this is a problem. So let's think about this. They're getting $80 billion. And they're going to hire a bunch of 45. So half of that money, $45 billion, is going towards enforcement. Auditors. Okay. So let's say they're not all auditors. Let's say, and they're going to, that is 87%. That was the IRS's own numbers. So 87,000, 87,000 new employees. Let's say 45% of them then are for enforcement. So that's, 40, let's just do the math. Half. Let's just say half. It's more than half, but let's say half. Now we're at 42, right? 42 and a half or 43 and a half. Okay, so let's say it's 40,000. Let's say it's 25,000. Well, the IRS got permission to hire 10,000 low-level employees this year. They haven't been able to find them. It's been very hard. Now, if you're talking about auditors, and that's why I wanted to remember, they were talking about to go after these rich people, you need expertise. Well, how do you get that expertise? Well, you get that expertise by auditing people. Well, you can't start auditing corporations and the wealthy. Those are very complex and complicated. They admit that. So how are you going to start? So you got to find them, and it's going to take a couple of years. Okay, so by the time any of this is going on, Yellen and Rettig and all these people will be gone. They won't be in office anymore. And so you won't be able to hold them accountable when they promise that they're not going after anybody who makes less than $400,000. Okay, so what happens? So now it's going to take a couple of years to get them. Well, how do you begin to become an auditor? And I've talked to auditors about this. Well, you begin by auditing the low-level people. So if we're going to hire a lot of new auditors and we're going to train them, well, how are they going to get trained? Well, they got to audit low-level people. Right? You can't start at the top. You're not qualified to do that. They say in their own way, right? That's complicated. So you got to start at the lower end people. And then you're going to, after a year, 2 years, you're going to work your way up to the middle people. And after a couple more years, then you might have some that are qualified that hang around that get it well enough to become experts or expertise in auditing to go after the higher income people. Well, that's going to take some years, right? 5 years from the time you get hired, you got to get trained. So all of those auditors that they're training have to get trained somewhere, and they have to get trained in the middle. That means they're going to have to audit more people. Doesn't that make sense to you? Doesn't that just the way things work? And for anybody standing up and saying that it's not going to happen is wrong. Of course it's going to happen. So now we're going to have to talk about later on how we're going to go about what kind of strategy should you have to avoid this coming after you, because they're coming after all of us. When they talk about the $1 trillion, okay, so if I'm a W-2 employee, maybe not you, right? So, but if I'm a small business owner, definitely you. They're going after you. That's definite. Okay, they rely that you don't keep good records. So one of the things you should do is start keeping good records, right? And start getting a good accountant. And start planning, tax planning. That's what you should be doing. That's what we help people do. So anyway, that's what I think. I think the fact checkers need to be fact checked, and that's what we're going to keep doing. Remember, we're going to ask you to like and subscribe. Like and subscribe. We need your help to get this information out. So help us do that by liking and subscribing. And remember, if you have IRS problems, if you owe the IRS money, if you haven't filed your tax returns, first thing you should do, get a copy of my book, Deal with Your IRS Problems Today. Go to freeirsbook.com, freeirsbook.com, get your free copy, and we'll see how that all works. So thanks so much for joining us here today, and we'll be back tomorrow with another edition of today's Tax Talk, and I hope you can join us then. Out.